Hello and good morning to everyone out there. It is 7:24 in the morning at the time that I'm recording this. It is Saturday, November 22nd, 2025. Rainy day out there today. My son's got his last soccer game of the season today. It's actually a tournament. They have a bye in the first round because they're the best team out there for 7-year-olds, by the way. So I'm looking forward to getting out to that later on. Hopefully it stays, nice enough to have the game, have the match. But let me talk to you about books here today. Today we are going through And Hell Followed, an anthology. There's 16 different authors that have given their work to this book. It is published by Death's Head Press. And today, it is my 78th edition of a Joe's Book Review for you. After going through about 23 of that subgenre called splatter westerns that all come from Death's Head Press, this was the first one that launched that imprint. So I'm finally getting around to the beginning of the story, so to speak, of this publishing company. Again, 16 stories done by various authors, many of whom went on to do a splatter western story themselves, and I'll address that as I see them one by one along the way. But the cool thing about this anthology is that the way it's been done, all the stories have the same subject matter. They all follow the same topic, and that is the Book of Revelations and the Apocalypse, or the End Times, or they sometimes call it the End of Days. So the cool thing is that it's not just like pulling together a bunch of pirate stories or a bunch of ghost stories. They were actually written specifically for this anthology. Now, who is Death's Head Press? It was an independent publisher that launched back in 2019. It was the brainchild of Jared Barbie and Patrick C. Harrison III. It was basically kind of a passion project in a way. If you listen to or hear his interviews, Barbie talks about, there was a certain book that I wanted to read, and I couldn't find it out there. Not a book that exists, just I would love to see a story that does bam. And he figured it would get almost to the core, the essence of horror and gore, but he hadn't seen it yet. So he did what any person might want to do. I'm going to go out there and start a publishing company. And I'm going to produce the book that I want to read. And he did. So they put this book out there, and then they started that little niche, like I said, of the subgenre of the splatter western, which is like a western horror, but with some kind of fantasy, magic, macabre, something along those nature that was imbued with the story. Now, since then, things have changed for the publishing company. They were acquired by Stygian Media in March of 2022, only about 3 years after it was started. Stygian Media is an independent publisher, and they hold almost like an umbrella company for a few imprints, actually. So, Stygian started in 2021. They acquired Death's Head Press in 2022. They even launched Dead Sky Publishing, which is almost like a graphic novel, almost comic book imprint of the same genre. So they're trying to tackle the horror genre from a couple different angles, or as many angles as possible. However, as far as Death's Head Press is concerned, I don't think that imprint is still in business. Their Facebook page hasn't posted anything since November of 2024. I don't have Instagram, but their main page only says it has 6 posts. On X, I think it says it moved to Dead Sky Publishing, which itself hadn't posted on X since January 2019. So, as far as I can find with, the vast internet sleuthing I'm even capable of, it just doesn't seem like this imprint exists any longer. However, the books do. So, let me get on with the show, and I'll tell you all about and hell followed. And I'm going to give you like a 30,000 feet overview of the stories that are written herein. And then I'll cap it off at the end with my thoughts and observations and such. So, here we go. It starts out with a story called The Whore of Babylon. Okay, and this is written by Sam West. The story itself, a writer is in a bar, is approached by this smoking hot woman. And a little tete-a-tete, whatever, and she finally tells him to make a choice. Either repent your sins or give in to some carnal pleasures. And by the way, while she's giving him this decision, her palm is just down his pants and engorged around his shaft. So, let's just say he doesn't repent at that moment. And I'll skip over some of the details to prevent spoilers. I will try to do everything here to be spoiler-free as possible, especially the endings. But let's just say, as he doesn't repent, the first trumpet of the apocalypse blares, and the undead arise, and the apocalypse begins. So, kind of a nice way to start out these 16 stories, huh? Follows up with Behind Blue Eyes. This is by Chris Miller, who I know from the splatter western called Dust. You follow You follow a husband trying to tell his wife all about his love for her. And the dialogue he gives here is truly heartfelt. You get some good backstory, and it kind of cements the scene. Okay? But then the mind's camera kind of backs up a little bit, and you realize he's at a gravesite. And he's talking to her through her tombstone, so to speak. So the dialogue shifts now to like, I'm the reason why you died, admission. And then it tells you more about that part of his story as well. And then, just like before, boom! A horn blasts. And, as we know already, it's the apocalypse horn. You know, horsemen start coming out of a portal and just liquefying people on the street. A giant worm-like caterpillar monster thing, it just engorges on anyone that's in its path. No matter who, no matter how many. And then, the dead arising and coming back to life. Including this newly deceased wife. So just the beginnings of, say, hell on earth. We follow it to the next story called Censored. Spelt more like the incense censer kind of thing. But it actually has more of a censorship aspect to the story as well. It's a clever title. This one's written by Christine Morgan, whom I know from the splatter western known as The Night Silver River Run Red. And here's a fun one that changes the narrative a little bit. You get to see the signs of the apocalypse, but you get to see it from the other side. You get to see it from heaven. Okay, so Revelations has this thing where it talks about seals being broken, horns blasting, bowls being emptied into whatever. But everyone is being delivered by an angel. So imagine there's like the 7 horns and the 7 seals and the 7 bowls and everything else. So there's like 20 some odd angels waiting their turn in line for to be called next to deliver their omen. So there's this order of battle. Oh, 1 second. I gotta plug this in. My apologies for that slight technical glitch there. So there's this order of battle of all the angels kind of waiting their turn. But there's one little upstart of an angel in the midst of this who's just having a shit fit. Because he doesn't have a role in the apocalypse. No horn, no censer, no seal, nothing. You know, it's unfair, the angel Cassiel tantrums. And the cool thing is, he's even given a reason why he is this way. Because you wouldn't think an angel would have these kind of problems. Well, it turns out Cassiel reads. We all should read more. But Cassiel reads. And he read the Codex Apocrypha. And he sought out the scrolls of Vulgaris and Profanus and Obscenus. So he's going to be vulgar, profane, and obscene. And this is why, throughout the whole tantrum, he can shout at the Archangel Gabriel, like, F you, right to his face. It's a fun ride. And, again, even though these short stories, let me not break out anything or spoil anything, but let's just say Cassiel, in his tirades, finds himself a way to have a little, let's call it apocalypse fun. So it's a nice, fun ride that you're taking through when you read this story. It's fantastic. The next story in the list is called The Day and the Hour by Weil E. Young, who also I know from the Splatter Western books, The Magpie Coffin, and A Few Souls More. And during that second book, it was said it was supposed to be a trilogy. No idea if the third one's ever coming out. Hope it does. Now, in this story, we have an interesting... What do the survivors of the apocalypse do on Earth? And it brings us through a minor taste of, like, I can only assume playing the game Fallout. You know, where they have to, like, wander the world. They have to learn where to walk and where to not walk. It's like a survivor's rules of the road for us readers. And it's interesting, because it's like, oh, they have to, like, scavenge their meals and make sure they eat in quiet and don't let anything that's, like, monitoring the world, like demon or angelic wise, find you. But in this story, our survivor meets a couple other survivors. And you get that kind of like will they, won't they alliance question. It's gonna come up, because it's strangers. They can either band together and help each other, or say, I want nothing to do with you. We're fine enough. Go walk your way. But they do end up having their pseudo-alliance and pulling a couple foodstuffs together and have like a meal. And they have this moment together just in time for the hammer to fall. Because now the apocalypse angels / demons notice the survivors. And let's just say the hunt is on. Now it turns over to another kind of story. This one's called The Old Man and the Lamb. It's by It's by Patrick C. Harrison III, whom I know from the Splatter Western, A Savage Breed. And taking a different stride here, we find this part of the world has a post-apocalyptic society, and one that is ruled by the church. A true, tyrannical, rules-based dictatorship. Like a true dystopian future. And they've built cities and communities. They have armies that are working on the border, repelling the demon horde. So, while being under this religion government can be horrifying, for this story, this society seems to be working in a way. It's keeping people safe. And the clergy walk around this land as if they are just pure royalty. You know, people bow down and pay obeisance to them as hallowed figures. Now, we follow this one man, who's the old man, and he finds himself in a bar. And the bartender thinks he sees something in the old man, almost like he's part of this resistance that's trying to like grow underneath the clergy tyranny. And he lets him see something extraordinary in the basement of the bar. And as he goes down there, they find a lamb. And the lamb has 7 horns and 7 eyes. It's like it's foretold in the Revelations scripture. And then at that moment, more clergy enters the bar. And the bartender has to leave the old man with the goat while he deals with them, and he'll come right back down. And then there's what is the old man to do? You know, we've gone into his mind a little bit, but we don't know if he's going to be, this is fantastic, about the goat, or, yeah, no, we don't need this in our life kind of a thing. So it builds its own ending within that. Moving on. Apocalypse Meh by John Wayne Comunale. I think I'm saying that right. And I know this author from the splatter western, All Your Dreams Will Come True When You're Dead. And this story is another one of those goofy, kind of off-the-wall stories. It just comes out of left field. It turns the tables on what you would expect in the genre completely. Because here we have something truly new. The entire story surrounds death metal. When the world apocalypse comes, there are no horns. There are no seals broken. The world just turns into like full metal. You know, whiskey, cigarette butts, black leather, electric guitars. Everyone plays metal all the time. In fact, the two biggest metal bands out there are one led by Satan and one led by Judas Iscariot. And they would compete against each other on stage, too. Now, our story here kind of follows a drummer who wants to make it big. He practices all the time. He idolizes these two mega awesome bands. And he's going to do anything he can to get his chance. And he gets his chance. But doesn't quite work out the way he wished. And it goes its own way from there. Again, you're on a roller coaster with these stories sometimes. Moving forward, the next story is called Fallen by James Watts. And switching gears back to the whole surviving the apocalypse vein of stories, we got a loner out there just kind of like scavenging for his survival. Roman by name. And he comes across an old man with a cart. And the cart is carrying a cage. And there's 3 people inside of it. I believe it's a family. You know, and during this, out in the fringes, there's a monstrous wolf-like abomination nearby which could kill them all. And while trying to figure out what he's going to do about the people in the cage or the old man himself, Roman flashes back to other horrifying times of his childhood when he experienced evil in an amusement park. And the story kind of converges those fears from childhood to the fears of the current day. And it tells the tale it needs to tell. I mean, it sets the stage, gives you some background, and then moves on with the story. Again, I'm trying not to... I want to give you more detail, but I don't want to give it enough that ruins anything. So, this tale has its own chapter in the anthology. Moving on to another one called Godless World. This is by Michelle Garza and Melissa Lizon, who are known as the Sisters of Slaughter in the industry, whom I also know from the splatter western Hell's Cargo. And this installment gives you more of that strong woman storyline that there's a huge following for, especially within the last 5 or 6 years. And it separates the story into like 2 parts. One part, you have like that warrior woman who's currently outside of an arcade that's being used as a shelter. And she's facing bandits and thieves, and also later on, apocalypse kind of demons. And then the second side of the story is the young ones that are hiding inside the arcade. And the main character is trying to beat a Mortal Kombat type game. And they do a lot to kind of like thread the going through levels of Mortal Kombat with how this woman is actually dealing with things outside the arcade. So the main young one who's trying to play this game is really being protected by the warrior woman, besides everyone there, but there's a kinship there as well. And she told the young one, no matter what occurs, no matter what you hear, you stay inside. Because, you know this already. In fiction, that never happens. So, The story continues with how does she protect and fight on the outside? How is this woman doing? How's the girl doing this on the inside, playing the game? There's also memories of playing the game with her father, whatever else, and it all comes together in a nice story. Keeping things going fun, the next story is Ham and Pudge by K. Trap Jones. Was it K. Trap Jones, or did I just write that down wrong? I'm sorry. No, it is K. Trap Jones. Much like that Angel story earlier, we get to see kind of like a behind the curtain, so to speak, of the apocalypse with this little story. I mean, Ham and Pudge themselves are two, like, 1.5 foot tall demons. They're just walking around the carnage. They're like a cleanup crew, so to speak. If they find a survivor, or even someone who's, like, alive but badly injured, like kill me, they'll just knock them out, like, kill them. They're just like, these guys should not be alive, ///. But also, while they're doing this, they're like collecting body parts or collecting whole bodies, and they're throwing it in this cart that they have with a stubborn donkey. And the whole time they're going about their little business, they're just like chatting it up along the way. I mean, they're pretty much just Jay and Silent Bobbing the apocalypse as little bitty demons, bitching and moaning about the task that they're about. And eventually at the end, they stop for a picnic, and they're just chatting up along the way as well. If you can enjoy a story as just a couple people talking without much really going on, as far as like action is concerned, you'll enjoy this. There's tons of stories out there like that. Moving further, the next installment is called Horse by Wrath James White. And Horse is all about a new drug. It's not cocaine. It's not heroin or even meth. It's red, and it's called Horse. And they try to tell you that the government gave it to their soldiers, trying to like super soldier them up a little bit. And it's made its way to street level. And here we're following a dealer who's literally only doing this for the money. Well, now, the planet is starting to go to hell, and people are getting their hands on Horse. But it turns people's minds. It makes them delusional. It makes them extra violent as well. And we see, after this dealer makes his initial sale, early in the story, he comes out and finds his car is totaled. Everything's stolen from it, and it's vandalized. And he knows that he made this deal in like a bad section of the city. So now he just wants to get home. And he runs into a homeless woman who just cut off a man's head in the street with like a huge steak knife or something like that. And this woman who's on this horse looks at him. He's like, rapist! And he's like, yo, chill. I'm not. And then he kind of like are talking about it. You see she's kind of like on this horse a little bit. But she decides to help him get out of that part of the city so he can get home. And that's the story that this one entails. Of, with everything going to shit around you in the neighborhood, trying to find someone and trying to get to a place of solace. Moving to the next story is called Hell Paso by C. Derek Miller, whom I know from the splatter western Starving Zoe. And he also had an installment in the Anthology, A Book Without a Name, called The Midnight Train to Tucson, which I believe was the best story of that whole anthology. And this one follows two soldiers who are working out of Fort Bliss. And it turns out they didn't know the apocalypse had started. Things were just coming out of nowhere or flying down from the sky or whatever. Well, one was coming on down, and the one soldier, boom, pops it right in the forehead, kills it. Not realizing he just shot Jesus Christ in the face coming return to earth. You see, Jesus, generally speaking, being from the region he was in, would have looked more Arabic than anything else. He wouldn't look like an Obi-Wan Ewan McGregor, which has been very whitewashed in our society. So when he saw this person, boom, flying by the way, boom, killed it, not thinking it was Jesus Christ. And the story evolves into like what have you done? Or this is all your fault. And the soldiers tend to turn on one another. And while this is going on, big old demon attack from the outside, and things get pretty nasty. And then we actually have Satan coming down and like talking with the guy, and it turns into the way it turns in the story. It's a fun one. The next one here is one called The Cult of Angel Eaters by Mark DeLoy. And this is one of those stories that kind of bring you down to street level. Kind of like if you watch any Marvel movies, you'll have some of these stories taking place in space where there's the magical glowy thing and people are shooting energy beams. And then you can switch over and you can watch other Marvel stuff, which might be on the street. You know, now you're watching Daredevil. Now the action takes place in alleyways. It's punching, mob gangs, you know, street level stuff. And I think this story kind of does that. And here we start out with some people that are kind of like waking up in jail. You know, they had a fun night, they got arrested. And they're sitting there, and the main character kind of looks over at his friend who's over by the front bars. He's muttering to himself as well the whole time. And suddenly he reaches out through the bars, and it looks like he grabs something, but there's nothing to see here. And he's physically wrestling with this thing. It's taking a while. It's hard. It's pulling him up against the bars and bashing his face and teeth into the bars. But he holds on. And eventually he wins and drags the thing into the cell. And the thing starts to materialize then. Okay, so maybe it's not all the way street level, but it started there. And as this thing starts to materialize, they realize that, you know, the other guy sees it's like an angel. It's got golden wings and beautiful skin. And the other guy starts tearing it apart. And he'll lick the, like, silvery, mercury-looking blood from his fingers like it were chicken grease. It turns out, the flesh and blood of an angel can really amp you up. It'll give you powers. Like he waves his hand and the cell lock liquefies, and they walk out and they escape. And this becomes a mission for them now. Gotta hunt the angels and get a little bit of the taste of this stuff. And they actually start forming a cult of followers. Now, the cool thing is this whole story is told about the past. It's a man talking to his therapist or his psychologist from the jail or what have you about like, oh, let me tell you what happened. So you get that whole story, it comes to its own conclusion, and then brings you back to the man with the therapist. And then it has an awesome end of the story there as well. So this one takes you on a great journey. As we move forward, the next one's called 6 Degrees of Separation by Delphine Quinn. This one starts with a childbirth. And when the child's born, is immediately given the implant. You know, there are things that they talk about immediately calling the 6 Degrees of Separation implant and the Grand Counselor. Basically, the implant is a device that measures your social merit score. If you behave badly, you lose points. You know, a newborn comes in as like a neutral, so their score might be, say, 650. Okay, but if you ever fall below 550, you'll need to go into training. Far too low, you might go into rehabilitation or even banishment. And this story has a lot of world building of how this all works within it. Our main character finds another character and they start to date. And they start having that like, hey, let's get out of here. You know, have you ever heard anybody coming back from rehabilitation? And it talks more about like, you can actually increase your score by being around people with other high scores. It can kind of bleed off of you because of the just atmosphere the person might be around. There's a bunch of, YA grade dystopian society kind of story going on here. And you follow as they kind of navigate through all of this. And it almost seems like you're trying to gather their free will. And the story goes on to its natural conclusion. And again, I'm not going to try to spoil it for you. But that's the frame of 6 Degrees of Separation. Moving to the next story is called The Unveiling by Cody Higgins, whom I know from the splatter western, They Built a Gallows for You and Me. And unfortunately, this was my least favorite of the stories. There was a lot of page real estate eaten up for what ended up being a story of feelings, or maybe a despair that might come from ennui. A woman answers the phone, and the person that calls her is trying to tell her that her husband is dead. So she has to go get a sitter for her child to go identify the body. The child with the name of Bezerel, if I'm saying that right. So, naturally, this happening, what does the woman do who answers the phone? She kills her cat. She throws the body and the box it was in out in the wood chipper. Because why not? Then, after many pages of the lives of the man and the woman, and maybe some of that ennui, some creature dances into Bezerel's room one night. And she screams. And then, nothing really. 4 years later, there's a 4-year-old son, Emmanuel, or Manny. And the kid's acting odd. And then one night, the mother hears a sound and goes out and sees the kid coming out of the bathroom. It's like, hey, what's wrong? You're acting weird. What's going on? And then he kind of mutates and distorts into something hideous, spouting out in a loud voice some Revelations lines. And then, again, not to spoil anything here, but there's a confrontation, and there's actions, and it ends its story. Moving to the next one, called Mark of the Beast by Richard Raven. And here you have the Antioch Baptist Church and one of the brothers that work as part of the clergy within. And they find a boarded up door in the back of a storage room that was behind the altar and is all in the church. And it provides access to a cellar down below, where, when he goes down there, something kind of enters him and takes control of him. Cut to, pregnant woman comes home from work, wanting to relax, take a bath, whatever else. And all of a sudden, a bunch of parishioners barge into the house, break down the door. They drag her out of the bathtub, they drag her husband, boom, and bring them to that cellar in the church. Now, in a scene, there's an almost cult-like scene going on there, with all the other parishioners. Naked, orgy, blood. And just fast forward to say there is a birth of sorts, and the scene just turns. And I'll leave it right there so you can take your interest and go read the story for yourself. And finally, the last story, the 16th story in the anthology, is called Outpouring by Jeff Strand. And here's another gem. Basically, it's about a couple, a man and a woman. And one morning, the woman sees something on the man's back. It's like a sore or something. And it's disgusting enough that she doesn't even want to touch it, even to help him. Doesn't want to spoon with him and have it, touch her body in any way, shape, or form. Well, he goes to work, and during the day, just progressively gets worse and worse and more painful as the day moves forward. Finally, he gets home. He wants to get in a shower and put ointment on it or something like that, and it's like a boil the size of a quarter. And he does shower and lets the hot and the cold water, just kind of pelt on it, whatever else. But regardless of that, it just smells. And the girlfriend comes over, and she actually does try to help him a little bit. Tries to, pop it, and it's just disgusting. ugh. I remember literally making a disgusting face while I was reading it. Because you have to keep, the pages turning, but you have to read every word on the page as you're doing it. I was like, and then afterwards, the girlfriend takes a shower herself to make sure she's all clean. But when she comes out, they both notice that the guy's goldfish are dead. They're kind of floating on top of the water. And the water's turning a little pinkish. Now, this cues revelation and quotes of the bowls and sores and fish dying and the water turning to blood. And then there's kind of like a real spiritual, metaphysical aspect to this, where the girlfriend comes to the conclusion that she thinks she needs to kill the boyfriend in an effort to quell the upcoming apocalypse. I'm sorry to say, I'm just going to leave it right there. You got to find out what happens next. I like this story. Now, we've gone through all the 16 stories that are collected in this anthology. And you can see the roller coaster it brought you on. Ups and downs and loops and spins and twists and turns. Okay? And I simply love the fact that the last story was the last story in the anthology. It was great enough to end the series on. Had they ended with one of the lesser stories in the set, I would have left the book more of a downer. But I will say, regardless of all that, it was a fast read. Because it was so interesting. See, I'm a fan of short story collections. In fact, on this book review list, there's 3 anthologies on there already. This will be my 4th. You have Stephen King's Everything's Eventual. There's a pseudo-splatter western anthology called A Book Without a Name. I mentioned it once above. And the gothic fantasy chilling ghost stories. And you'll find their links on the playlist if you go through them. And I've got 2 more high upon the shelf up there. I can't wait to get to them either. 2 anthologies about sailing and the high seas, broadsides battles, you name it. I can't wait to get to those. I might have to do a whole, frigate-type theme one time, because I have those 2, and I want to reread Treasure Island all on the list. So I'll probably try to go through all 3 of those, boom, 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 back to back to back. But I digress. Basically, I enjoyed this book. And I hope you will as well. I tried to give you a taste of what you'll see inside of it, so you can figure out if it's up your alley. However, I gotta turn the page now. And I have to get into that item that I had to get to with most of the Death's Head Press books that I've read thus far. And this is where I have to take a look at editing. I recall as I was reading this book, I had that moment to myself where I was approaching the 100-page mark. I had finished 5 whole installments in this series so far, and something scratched in my mind and said, whoa, all the other books that I've read that came after this one had so many editing and typo errors, and so far I haven't found one. And that's just excellent. Well, no sooner did that thought come into my mind, they started appearing. So, I will go through some of the ones I found now to let you know my disappointment. And it starts with page 89, during the whole death metal story by John Wayne Comunale. And here it's had all the letters of a word, they just screwed up the order. So they're all talking about, hey, this is the new world, we're all into metal, and instead of being united under this new existence of post-apocalyptic metal musicians, he said they were untied. So they were untied under the new existence of post-apocalyptic or whatever else. So it's just like, not the right word, dude. When you read it, it kind of just jumps out at you. A few pages later, he misspells the name of Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue fame. He forgets the first I in the word Nikki, so it's like Nikki Sixx when you read it. And I'm not trying to think it's just the one glitch that happens. Later on page 100, there's 2 errors. almost as if like the writer's going through this, like, listen, I'm almost done. I don't have to be careful anymore. You know, I'm approaching the last page. You know, the sentence goes, I can still feel a buzzing vibration through whatever was left of me. Possibly just my consciousness. But then it stopped. It too stopped. And there's something about that doubling up of the it stopped, it too stopped. I think it might work, but it totally lacked a pause in there of any kind that would make it work. But that's not all. Later in the paragraph, Judas turns to the character and says, come on, let's go. But he doesn't write it as, come on. He writes it as, come one. It's not like, come one. Come with me, child. It wasn't done that way. Just an error. Moving on, page 119. In fallen, I think there's just a poor word choice. You're a peculiar one, Roman said, confused on rather the old man a little off in the head or purposely messing with him. Which probably should be whether, confused on whether the old man is a little off in the head or purposely messing with him. Next, we have the Sisters of Slaughter in their story Godless World. Although from what I saw of their splatter western novel Hell's Cargo, it should probably amend that a little bit to the Sisters of Slaughtering English Grammar. Page 127. Extra characters entered here, where it says, I never said we're friends, she replied. There's just like a capital F at the end of that. I never said we'd be friends, F, she replied, and no one's named, starting with an F. Later on, they use an apostrophe instead of a comma on a contraction, along with the lack at the beginning of the paragraph of an indent, which was their style all along up until that point. Page 135, you're missing the B in the word but. So the sentence reads, she felt as if she couldn't move her legs. Tragic. The next story that happens is during Horse, on page 157. And this could be arguable, I'm sure. But typically when you're fired from a job, when you're downsized, it's called being laid off. For some reason the author uses, I was laid out of a job. It was enough for me to stop reading and focus on it, and again, took me out of my imagination of the story I was reading. And then I think we get about 50 pages after that until we come to page 205, when the person's writing about the Grand Counselor, 2 T's in the word the, capital T, lowercase t-h-e, to the. Page 255. Usually when you're talking about animals, they have tufts of fur. Okay? T-U-F-T. Here, he did tufts of fur. T-U-F-F. 2 F's, not a T. Next one is page 257. Instead of clearly enjoying what she was doing, you don't get it said that way. It's not called clearly. We get clearing enjoying what she was doing. Wrong tense. Along with the demon slashed at cord instead of slashed at the cord. And it wasn't like there was a lot of clipping of images or something like that where you see like demon slashes cord, boom, boom, boom. It just was missing. Now, why I can focus on these is I actually, during reading, I dog ear the pages of anything that goes wrong. So I can go back to it later on when I'm doing this, and you can see all these little gaps where the dog ears are. And I had like another 10 dog ears in there, but as I reread these when I was doing my notes, I couldn't identify on reread what the reason was why I marked them the way I did. Although I was kind of tired when I was typing up these notes, so I probably wasn't on game as I was when I was reading it and when it took me out of my imagination. So, nothing else to say. There you have it. That was my analysis of And Hell Followed, an anthology. If it sounds like it's up your alley, please go out and pick up a copy for yourself. I myself have a couple extra copies of these of my own. I mean, you can almost see the reds right there on the bookshelf. And I'm trying to like put, in fact, this whole section is like splatter westerns that I have for sale on eBay. I'm trying to get big lots out there. So maybe you can find a bundle for yourself. That being said, I'm off. Thank you so much for spending 45 minutes. I was surprised. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I'm hoping this was enlightening. I can't even speak today. I hope you enjoyed it. All right, I will be back here as soon as I can. I got a couple others that are finished next to me on my little pile here, so I'll write up their notes, and I'll do a video on those too. In the meantime, you enjoy the rest of your life. Bye-bye.